Today we are interviewing Leah Chanin, now retired, who was the director of the law library and professor of law at Mercer University from 1964 until 1993. Following her retirement from Mercer, Leah moved to Washington, D.C., where she served as director of the law library and distinguished professor of law at the University of the District of Columbia from 1992 until 1996, and then as head of public services at Howard University's law library from 1996 until 2001. I also want to mention that Leah served as Mercer's Law School's Dean Pro Tem for one academic year while she was still there. Leah, let's begin with a little personal history. Could you tell us a little bit about where you were raised and about your life both when you were young and today?
Well, I was born in Galveston, Texas, as was my father, but then the Depression hit my father, who had been a successful businessman, and he moved our family to Texas City, Texas, which is a tiny little town 15 miles north of Galveston. I lived there from the time I was 8 till I went away to college. At 16, it was not a great experience. Texas City was a little country town, and I never did like very small towns. So I had a very wonderful family, though, and was fortunate. Went off to college, to Stevens College for 2 years. And so I had a lovely upbringing. I had all 4 of my grandparents, unlike most young people today, and just had a really nice life. Had 3 siblings, and we all got along very well. So I would say I was among the very fortunate people who had a good upbringing. The Depression really knocked my father out, but he went to Texas City and opened up a new business and did fine. So by the time I went off to college, he was okay. Mm-hmm. My life today is wonderful because I'm almost a full-time volunteer at my synagogue. I also cook for the homeless once a month. I love to cook. I'm a big-time cook. I like to eat too. And my life is wonderful, but I'll say this. I haven't found anything that takes the place of my professional life. I miss my professional life terribly. I know that I don't want to be back doing it again, but I still miss my professional life a great deal. It was the highlight of my life.
Well, that is, I think, a nice statement about you must have enjoyed being a law librarian, and as I know I did, many of our colleagues have expressed the same sentiments about their own situations. Could you tell us a little bit about your degrees and how you earned each?
Well, I left Texas City, Texas, and went to Stevens College in Missouri, which in those days was 2-year college for women. Now it's 4-year college for women. I enjoyed my 2 years there. My older sister had gone there, and when I left there, I went to Southern Methodist University and earned a BA in economics. I was going to law school there and to the London School of Economics. I wanted to go to the London School of Economics in the worst way. When I graduated from college, I was 20 years old. My parents said no young woman can go to Europe by herself. Remember, that was 1950, and 48 actually. So after I graduated from SMU, I decided I'd go to law school, and then by then I'd be old enough I could do what I pleased to do. So I was enrolled in SMU Law School, and my friend with whom I'd gone to college invited me to Macon, Georgia. She had married a man from Macon. She was from Chicago. And there I met my husband, and several weeks later I became engaged. And so I said, well, I still have to go to law school. So I went to Mercer Law School. It was a great experience, and graduated from Mercer Law School in 1954. So that was how I got my law degree. I had always known I was going to be a lawyer since I was 12 years old. I was the only woman in my law school for the whole 3 years. Then when I went out to practice law after I graduated, which was tough to find a job, very tough, I was the only woman at the bar for at least 8 or 10 years.
That must have been its own experience, and I imagine not altogether completely pleasant either in those days.
It was very funny. In law school, the faculty was just fine. I never had one drop of trouble with the faculty. When I was in law school, I had some trouble with fellow students because it was in the South, the Deep South, and most of those guys came from the Deep South, and they had a different view of women than I did. But for the most part, I got along with most of them. Had some good friends, but had some that weren't good friends.
Well, you made an interesting move. You were a lawyer, practicing, I guess, at one point in your career. And then you decided to become a law librarian. Now, could you tell us sort of how that all came about?
Yeah.
And did anybody play a role in influencing you, perhaps?
Yes, I had a call one day, and it was in the late fall, and the dean of the law school, whom I knew who had been a professor when I was there, I'd been practicing about 6.5 years. My practice was nice, but it wasn't hugely successful, but I enjoyed it. Asked me would I come and interview for a job at the law school. And when he talked to me about being a law librarian, I had never thought of such a thing. And I said, well, I don't know. And he explained it to me and told me I'd be on the faculty, and I was always a book person, so it sounded interesting, so I said, okay. So I said, I'll try it for about 3 or 4 years. If I don't do a good job or I don't like it, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to tell you goodbye. He said, fine. So I went there, and to my incredible surprise, I loved the job. I just loved it. I learned a lot, a huge amount. I didn't know much when I first went there about running a law library. And at that time, I had one staff person and me. Mercer was a small law school. And I loved it more and more, and then the law school and the law library developed, and it got to be better and better.
Well, that all sounds like you had a hand in that considerably, and it must have been a challenging and interesting time.
Well, the most fun was realizing what was out there. I remember that I was at a legal research seminar with Morris Cohen and other people of his like, terrific mentors, terrific people. And one of the papers that we had to write in this legal research summer seminar was how to develop our collection. And I wrote this paper, I thought it was pretty good. And he said, you're not very ambitious, are you? I thought, what do you mean? He said, well, you're not searching wide enough or broad enough to develop your library. You need to look into more resources. And coming from Morris, I took it very seriously. So then I began expanding my horizons as to what, even though the law school was small, the bar was really virtually the only library the bar had. So I began expanding, and fortunately it was during the era of developing law libraries, and resources became more plentiful. So I was able, when I took over the Mercer Law Library, there were 45,000 volumes. When I left there 28 years later, we had well over 300,000 volumes. So I thought that was one of the most enjoyable things, was developing that law library.
I imagine today many of our colleagues are downsizing for probably very sensible reasons, and
Yes.
substituting digital media of various sorts. And I know that has its upside, but I too was of the era when we were building book collections, and we were proud of it. And the schools were competing to some extent. Who would do the biggest library, and that was the so-called best library, and so on. And so when you describe your enjoyment with that, I can certainly appreciate that, having had much the same kind of experience during my career.
And it engendered so much respect from the faculty, because when they didn't really expect to have all those resources. New faculty that came to Mercer, which was a small law school in a medium small town, didn't expect that they would have everything just about they needed, almost everything. And I prided myself on not having a narrow provincial view, mostly motivated by Morris and my close friend Shirley Beisowitz, who's unfortunately gone now, people like that. So I remember one time, a member of the bar came in and he wanted some kind of tax something, which we didn't have. We did have a good tax section, but we didn't have that. So he said to me, now, if you would get this instead of the Fiji Island reports, it would be better. And being the person I am, which people that know me know I'm extremely frank and forward, I don't have a lot of tact, I said, well, now you just leave me to the task of developing this law library the way I think is best, and you just stick to being a tax lawyer, and we'll just get along fine. I didn't think we should have a xenophobic, narrow view just because we were a small law school. So we didn't.
Well, I don't know about tax teachers. They have a lot of needs, especially in those days, for some rather expensive services. And I remember a colleague who also taught tax on my faculty one day coming to me and not questioning some foreign acquisitions of foreign law, because we didn't really have that at
Yeah.
American U. But certain other fields didn't need some of the
yes.
stuff I was allegedly buying for them. And it could be better spent on guess what field.
Well, I probably would have listened to a faculty member more. This guy was a member of the Macon Bar, and they used our library for free, and some of them weren't very generous about donating, so I didn't feel like I had too much obligation to him.
So
you
he
know.
was truly using it for free. Yeah,
Oh, yes.
I see what you mean
Yeah.
very much. Well, Leah, you have done a lot in the field. You obviously did it in your work, but you also did it beyond the confines of your own building or your own office, and did things for the associations, various organizations that we're all part of. And I want to mention at this point that you are one of a relatively few recipients of AELL's highest award for service, the Marion Gould Gallagher Distinguished Service Award. And you were also a member of AELL's Hall of Fame. You have also written, among other ways of doing service, extensive articles in the Law Library Journal, other periodicals, including the Journal of the Legal Profession and the Georgia State Bar Journal. You also have co-authored or edited several other publications, including 2 editions of Legal Research in the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. You have served as chair of AELL itself, the Southeastern chapter of AELL, and many leadership roles. Could you talk a little bit about some of these and some of the things you've done and accomplished through them?
Well, being active in ALL and growing as I did from a small law school librarian to having a wider view, I was privileged to serve on State Bar Committee. I taught professional responsibility later in my career, which I loved. I was privileged to serve on a commission for 5 years to revise the Code of Professional Responsibility for Georgia. I will tell you that I learned a great lesson there, because it was a wonderful committee of lawyers and judges and professors, and we worked diligently. I drove to Atlanta once a month for 5 years. And it was a great experience, and all along the way, we would tell the State Bar Board what we were doing. We'd give them a report every 6 or 8 months, so they knew we were doing. We had very little feedback. This is so typical. So we did this for 5 years. When we finally had our final product, we were so proud of it, to revise the Code of Professional Responsibility of Georgia. The board rejected it. So I learned a great lesson. So some of the committee were furious. They said, I'll never serve on another committee again. I put in hundreds of hours and so forth. And I said, no, well, you can't feel that way. They should have paid more attention and told us what they didn't like. But we were asked to give them a draft. They didn't like it. And a few years later, they did adopt one very close to what we did. So I learned a lot about committee work then, that you couldn't get angry if the big boss or the State Bar or the president of ALL rejected your work. You just had to do the best you could do. And I will say that one of the publications I do feel still proud of, although Penny Hazelton is now editing it, is Specialized Legal Research, which was my own special idea. And that was to give lawyers and librarians and researchers everywhere help in specialized subjects of the law which you're not familiar with. We tried not to get just stuff. This is not written, for example, there are like 12 chapters, tax, immigration, military, all these things. It's not geared toward the tax lawyer or the immigration lawyer. It's geared toward the normal lawyer who doesn't specialize, or the law library researcher who doesn't really know a lot about tax. So that if you have a source, like a regulation, a ruling, where do I find it? It was very popular. It was the only publication I ever really made any money on, and I loved doing it. And I didn't write it by myself, of course. I just edited it. I wrote a couple of chapters. but lots of great law librarians wrote chapters in it. But when I retired, I felt that I didn't have the staff or the support to continue to do it in a proper manner. So I gave it to Penny Hazelton, and she took it, and she's done a terrific job. And it's still in existence. Now, that was 1987. There are not a lot of publications, other than the real classic tax and contract and all that are still in existence 23 years later, or 25 years later. So I felt happy with that work that I did. And I'll tell you the main thing. I think that being a law librarian and doing a decent job opened so many doors to me. So many doors. Work on the state bar. I did accreditation work with the American Association of Law Schools and the American ABA, which a lot of law librarians did, but they were mostly at big, prestigious law schools. Mm-hmm. And that was a great experience for me because there were no other law schools in my city. Unlike if you live in Washington, where there's 6 or 8 or 10, you can see somebody or go to their law school and see what they're doing. So getting the opportunity to go on a lot of accreditation visits was a huge opportunity. I would go to big law schools, small law schools, and I would see what other people were doing. And I learned so much from them. And I stole so many ideas from my colleagues. But I didn't have to steal them because law librarians are incredibly cooperative. They don't have this ownership ego thing. If they're doing something right and you call them up and say, what should I do about this collection, or what should I do about this, they'll tell you what they've done. They're just wonderful people. And that's why I miss the profession so much.
Well, likewise, you know, if you call up a colleague, they're all friends too. I mean, they meet you at meetings and in other ways. And if you say you're thinking of doing something in such and such way, and they've tried it and know that it doesn't quite work, they'll usually tell you that, or maybe always tell you that as well, which
Yes.
is just as helpful, maybe more helpful
Yes.
than saying, gee, I did it, and this is how it worked, and this was the result, and it was good.
You're right, and before the days of email and so forth, I would persuade deans by just telling them, look, if you don't send me to conventions, which I never really had that trouble with any dean,
Mm-hmm.
but they sometimes didn't want to send the deputies or the associates. We don't know the people, we can't call on them.
Yeah.
Maybe we could, but we get much better results if I call Emory or I call NYU and I know somebody there. I'm going to get what I want. So this is just very important.
Yeah.
Meeting people.
Now this, in a sense, may be sort of an unfair question, because you, like I, have been sort of retired from the active law library profession for a while, but over the years we were active, we began to see change, and then we began to see more and more change as the computers and the digital media all came in. And first it was microfilms, and then, you know, computers. And these two people who had been law librarians in the generations before us, where they saw change, but it wasn't like this. There has been a lot. And this, of course, as we both know, continues. Do you have any thoughts about the changing, or if there are changing aspects to our role as a profession and librarians that you'd like to share?
I think just from my observation, this is not from any great experience, but from my observation, people are going to be more technically involved. I don't know that that makes for any better personal relationships, and I am convinced that personal relationships, whether they're with faculty, with lawyers, with judges, with whomever, creates the environment so that you can be of better service to people. And emailing somebody is not the same as walking in their office. It saves a lot of time, and it's a good idea. But emailing someone is not the same as they knowing you, you knowing them. And so it makes for more access, it makes for a friendlier environment. I do think, now I prophesied this years ago when computers first came in. I said to my dean then, I'm not looking for a bank of computers for students, 200 computers. Some law schools did that kind of thing. I said, no, we're not doing that, because within a very short time, every student's going to have his own computer. We should certainly have sufficient computers for the needs of students while they're in the law school, but everybody's going to have his own computer, which they did. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, it seems to me that there are not the numbers of people in the law library that there used to be. Law faculty are on their computers getting what they think is sufficient information. They'll come to the law library for historical research, or they'll come when they can't find something. But they're not there like either they or their assistants like they used to be. I've observed a few law schools, and I think that's probably correct. The students are certainly there, but they're on their computers, and I'm sure they still use the reference staff and have regard for them, because the reference staff is teaching advanced legal research or whatever their interaction with the students. Yes, it's very different. It's not the same personal kind of thing, and so the director of a law library has to go out of her way to cultivate the friendships, professional friendships with the faculty, and be sure they can anticipate their needs.
I think what you're saying was always true. It's important for the library, the librarians, not just the director, to be somewhat involved in the lives of the law school or the institution. But I think what you're suggesting is, and I think probably rightly so, that in today's era where so much is done kind of individually on a computer instead of traveling to the law library or going, out of the law library, there certainly is the possibility that some of the human element is going to disappear from the interactions, and that's not a desirable thing.
And I say to once in a while I have a chance to talk to somebody who's new to law librarianship or who's trying to go up the ladder. I say the most important thing you can have as a law librarian is integrity and credibility. If the dean believes in you, you can make some pretty bad mistakes and you'll be forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've got credibility and integrity, that's it. And if your faculty thinks that you can do what they need you to do, you're going to always have the respect needed to be promoted or to have a job security.
And that hasn't changed over the years.
And that hasn't changed at all.
Yeah, and presumably won't either.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you, Leah Chanin, for allowing us to visit with you today and for taking these few moments to share so much about yourself and about our profession. Before closing, however, I always like to give the opportunity for the last word. So do you have anything that you would like to add this afternoon?
Yes, when I was at Mercer, sometimes I used to yearn to be at a bigger, more prestigious law school. However, I am greatly appreciative of the opportunities that Mercer gave me when they hired me as a law librarian, and I certainly didn't know what I was doing. They put great faith in me, they gave me resources, they gave me the freedom to do what I thought was the best thing to do, and it worked out quite well. And so in spite of the fact that I did wish sometimes, and I did have lots of opportunities, but I was married to a man who thought Macon, Georgia was the promised land. I was not willing to break that relationship, and so I stayed at Mercer. Mm-hmm. When I left there, I found out what I really knew anyway, which I used to tell people. I had the world's best work conditions, the world's best job, and it worked out fine, and the confidence that they put in me enabled me to do so many things and have such a wonderful professional life. So I don't really have very many regrets, and I would like to have worked at Columbia or someplace else if they would have had me, and I did have interviews at places like that, but my career was just wonderful. I loved it.
Good. Well, I think that is the most important advice you could share with anybody is find a place that treats you right, do what they need for them, and enjoy the experience, and make it a sort of a long-term commitment if it works out for both you and the place. I also remember meeting your husband, your late husband, the year you were president of ALL. He came to the meeting, and I remember he had given you as a gift, I think it was a pen that you wore that had worked into it. It was a custom piece of jewelry.
He went, it was in Detroit when I was installed as president-elect, because I was installed, or maybe president. I was installed as president, and then the next year I was in Houston. And he was so crazy. He was a cute guy. He went all around he took Babe, our then executive secretary, with him to try to find a gift for me. He didn't find anything he liked.
Mhm.
So he went into a jewelry store. He was a smart guy. And he said, I want to have a pin made for my wife. She's the new president of American Association of Law Libraries. They know what he's talking about. And so he showed them what he wanted, and they designed a darling pin that said ALL and had a little diamond in it, and I wore it for many years.
Yeah.
After I retired, after 2 or 3 years, I said, I don't want this sitting in my jewelry box. So after my friend Suzanne Cassidy became the director of the law library at Mercer, there was an interim period. I left, and then 7 years later, she was appointed director. In between, there was another director. I took it to her, and I said, Suzanne, I want you to wear this pin whenever you go to ALL meetings, and when you leave Mercer, I want you to give it to someone else. So she's still wearing it, and I hope she will give it to the next director at Mercer when she retires. So that's where that pin is.
Oh, that's a wonderful story, because
Yeah.
it was I thought at the time, a very good-looking piece of jewelry.
It was.
But the important thing that I thought was the sentiment in which it was given.
You're right. I valued it, but
Yeah.
I didn't want it just sitting in my jewelry
He
box.
must have been tremendously proud of your achievement as the president of the organization at that point.
Well, I think he was. And he was a big Mercer supporter, although he wasn't a Mercer alum.
Mhm.
But he was very funny. He said, he told the president, who he was friendly with, he said, they came from Columbia, Yale, Harvard, but here's a Mercer person, president of ALL. I laughed at that.
Yeah. Well, I remember I had sort of the same kind of experience at America, and it was a nice step for me when I first went there. But I thought I might eventually move to a bigger, so-called more prestigious place. And like all my faculty colleagues who came about the same time, my contemporaries, we just settled in and essentially turned the place into the kind of place we wanted to come to in the first place.
And it's a wonderful law school, America.
Oh, thank you. But it was a good experience. So your description of your years at Mercer sound very much similar to what I think I had at American. Well worth it. Well,
Thank you, Pat, for inviting me to this interview. It's just been a real pleasure, and it's wonderful seeing you again, and it's wonderful sharing my experiences with other law librarians.
yeah. Well, as I've said to numerous people, I am having more fun on this little undertaking of doing these interviews for the Hein Company to put on HeinOnLine. And it's reconnecting with colleagues. This, as I said, you and I are both retired.
Right.
It's, I haven't been to meetings in a few years, and it's nice to have an opportunity now to do a little
Well,
traveling around and seeing old friends.
Thanks to Dick Spinelli and Hein, both of whom I consider friends,
Yeah.
for doing this.
Well, Dick is a very special person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think time and again I've heard similar sentiments from a lot of other people. Well, thank you,
Thank you.
for being part of this.